Okay, is there a first question from among the audience? We've heard from our 4 speakers today, Prof. Chai talking about immersive technology, 3D immersive technology, and has used the program in MAE as an example. We've heard from also Prof. Naomi Lobia that LKC School of Medicine has been using a lot of VR, AR affordances to help young medical students to learn about how to become a doctor in very, very interesting ways. We've also heard from Prof. Tan Sing Chi talk about the use of data analytics, learning analytics, and also data-driven practice for both instructions as well as for doing research. And our last speaker, Professor Matt Bower, essentially talked about learners as designers and also some of the principles that surround the use of technology in the classroom. So do you have a first question or a comment? Doesn't have to be a question. Yes, could you please? Yeah.
I have a question. So we heard a lot about the use of...
Can we have the microphone? Yeah, so everyone can hear.
Thank you. We heard a lot about the use of AR and VR and of simulation. And I can see the advantage of AR and VR in situations, for example, where the environment is dangerous, where the environment is too expensive to provide to the students, where we don't want to harm patients. But is there anything intrinsically that in AR, VR that is better than being on a construction site or interacting with a patient, for example? Is there something that is not just a way to keep the students safer or possibly to expand to a greater number of students and so on?
Thank you for the good questions. Indeed, the physical and the virtual things, we usually think these two digital twins. In the physical space, when students doing experiments, they have many advantages, so they have certain disadvantage. So the virtual version is to complement what is missing there. For instance, when do the physical experiment, you make mistakes, but unlikely you can do undo and redo, undo, reduce. But in the virtual environment, it's pretty much easier. So our student can make mistakes. Through mistake making, they learn something, what's proper, what's the principle behind. So I think for issues like this, virtual experiment do take some kinds of advantage.
So I think also it's a controlled environment where you can receive feedback in a consistent way, and you can potentially select appropriate cases that suit that individual learner. So I think there's that potential to personalize the learning experience according to the different learners' needs, which of course in any real world setting will be less easy to control. So I think so.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot about a really classic debate in educational research about the Clark-Cosma debate about will media ever influence learning? And on the one side they say, well, if you do exactly the same thing on a computer screen as you're going to do on a piece of paper, then actually you're deriving no pedagogical benefit out of it. And in fact, to the extent to which often the fidelity of an AR or VR experience can't replicate what would happen in the real world, you're actually getting a disadvantage. The advantage comes in when you start to do something a little bit different, something where, for instance, you're slightly manipulating the environment to add an information layer or to be able to split apart something so you can see it better. So I think that the real trick is understanding how to use, for instance, AR and VR to add that additional aspect to the learning experience. And so for instance, the ability to undo and redo is a huge advantage. Plus what you mentioned in terms of being able to do things safely and at different scales that is really important.
Thank you for that question. Can I move on to a second question or comment from the audience, please? Thank you.
Chai, just now you showed the video of the students using the VR, and I noticed that about somebody was doing the VR thing, and the rest were participating, right? Could you explain what happened actually?
Okay, so I mentioned quickly this is not a fully immersed environment, partially because one reason is cost. If everybody have HMD, the virtual flipped classroom can be quite expensive. And more importantly, I feel if the student each have HMD, they play with something to learn, that's fine. But the missing part is the communication between students. Okay, since we are emphasizing the team-based or small group team-based kind of learning, I would like to have my student to play a game or serious game. At the same time, the rest of students can participate in discussions, particularly when you see the student having kinds of mistake. Okay, then the rest can suggest or can discuss what's wrong, and we should avoid something making further mistakes, kinds of things. So I feel the current implementation, the flipped classroom, the VR AR ready flipped classroom, do take advantage of immersive learning, but we do not really, personally, I do not really encourage, let's say, every student wear HMDs. At the end of the day, they are talking to themselves, maybe.
Thank you for that question and the answer. I saw a hand over here just now. Yes, could we have some microphones over here, please? Yes. The lady first, and then the gentleman by the side.
Hello. Hi. Okay. Great. Thank you. I'm a PhD student from SUTD, Singapore University of Technology and Design. Actually, in our university, the courses of the undergraduate level is design-based style. So the school try to integrate design courses with other disciplines, for example, physics and chemistry, etc. But as I know, the undergraduate students, they feel kind of messy because design, it's a multidisciplinary field, and when the students need to design something, especially for the complex systems, it's very it's hard to control, especially in year 1 or 2 when they don't have so much knowledge in different disciplines. So my question is, do you think it's a good idea to integrate design into other curriculums, or make design as an individual one, or in a say year 3 or 4 later stage of their undergraduate education? How do you think is a good way to do to teach the student as a designer? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think this is a pedagogical decision by the university to have a design-based kind of curriculum. It's a matter of scaffolding to me, because I think design-based curriculum can be implemented in primary school. It has to be implemented in primary school. So it depends on how much you want. It depends on how the professors or the instructors detect or analyze the learners' needs, and then how much scaffolds to provide at different stages of your curriculum. So I think there's always not a clear cut yes or no, but it's amount of scaffolding and when to scaffold. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that's a very good approach.
Yeah, really good question. Because to say that, oh, if we teach by design, we're going to have better learning outcomes, is as naive as saying, oh, if we use technology, we're going to have better learning outcomes. You can use technology and have the worst lesson ever. You know, it just renders it confusing and meaningless to people. So it's all about how it's implemented, exactly, how the scaffolding you provide, is the scope and complexity of the task beyond the level and capabilities of the students. What is the teacher doing in order to incrementally build up the design capabilities of students? Do they have the required prerequisite knowledge? So all of these things are things that the teacher really needs to consider. But at the back of all of it, the reality is that design is by its very nature, and this is something that I cover in the design chapter of my book, is by its very nature, it has to be complex, it has to be messy, and we have to get comfortable with that process. Because if the teacher is telling you exactly how to do every step, then it's no longer design.
Thank you. So there's a question over there. Yes, the microphone is coming around.
I'm Reality-Nanyang. I work with Neon. Also, I do spend a lot of time in AI, deep learning, machine learning, and also associated with university education. Now, I have a fundamental block, which I hope all of you can, which is, yes, AR, VR is definitely making it easy to learn what we have been learning in a abstract fashion, in a 2D fashion, and it makes it a lot more creative. But now question is that can we apply AI in the content and the pedagogy itself? I mean, I know it appears one is teaching AI, but can we apply AI, which is getting applied in all domains, into education? Can it be used so that you can have a lot more, I would say, I mean, as there is a data-oriented you have talked about, can we use that data orientation rather than wisdom oriented, which is last 200 years? This is pedagogy and this is the PhDs who have learned about it. So question is that, is there some kind of a thinking to apply this deep learning? Because today anything what you past, future or current can be modeled in simple equations, and that can be converted into mathematical equation, can then be implemented using AR, VR versus applying AR, VR to current solutions. So I'm not sure whether that's applicable in this education domain. So your thoughts?
Thank you. So would any of the speakers like to take that?
Certainly, we in the medical school are currently looking at the use of AI in terms of personalising the students' learning experience. So when you have large amounts of student data you have information about students' learning preferences, and then you have certain areas of the curriculum that you want them to develop skills in our case it's clinical reasoning, how to make a diagnosis when presented with different types of clinical case. AI provides potential to use those data to offer different types of support to learners who have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. So I think it's something that we can explore. I think in the same way it's been used in medical practice now, and we can see that there are AI-driven decision-making systems which improve outcomes for diagnosis among doctors. It has the potential to be used in the context of developing skills in education.
Yeah, I do not have time to discuss one of the slides related to fundamental research. In fact, to me, a virtual augmented reality today is very hot, but behind VR, AR, actually, there are something simulations. You got to have a model. You solve this kind of problem by modelings or simulations. So at the end of the VR or AR is a way of presenting results so that you can change the parameter, you can interact with the parameters. So from that angles, actually AI, mathematics, optimization are already there, except to many of us actually we do not know somebody doing a PhD 4 years just developing this algorithm, this AI algorithm. So they are supporting AR, VR already somehow there, but I believe there are still a long way to go if we are make it the reasoning, the learning process intelligent, like AI embedded in the learning process very, very naturally. This is something we are interested, but till now I think still it's quite tough. Yeah.
So I think if the AR VR solution can go beyond just visualization, but to be able to capture some of the learning data in the whole process. So if you can have an AR VR environment in which students can interact with one another, you can collect behaviors in the AR VR environment, and then you can use those data to predict the students' learning behavior, to analyze the content of the talks, for instance. And that's where I think the AI can come in to support some of the learning processes in AR VR environment.
Thank you for the answers, and thank you for the question. So let's take another one. Oh, okay, there are two questions. So I think the gentleman there has got the mic, so I'm going to ask you to start first, and I will come to you after this. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Fan Man. I'm from NUS, Institute for the Application of Learning Science and Education Technology. My question is, we believe that technology is ready, future technologies are innovative. We have got many excellent educators. They are ready to create active and collaborative learning environment, but without technology or with minimum technology, because they have fear. It'd be nice to hear from at least two of you, what do you think their fears are, and what is your opinion about addressing them? Thank you.
Fear of technology.
Well, I think Christy mentioned at the opening of this panel session that pen is a technology, pencil is a technology, paper is a technology. So if you look in the broader scheme of technology, okay, that we are interacting with technologies all the time in our life. So I think this fear of technology sometimes is what to a certain extent can be overcome if you look at technology in different ways. It's not something that is something that you can handle. So there's one perspective. Okay. Another thing that I think most a lot of barriers of using technology is not so much of fear of technology, but I think time needed. I think the research has shown, from meta-analysis of research paper has shown that time needed to actually to be able to use the time to design and to experiment with the use of technologies in classrooms so that you can actually be comfortably using that productively in your teaching. So I think another way to overcome some of this is actually providing the environment for the instructors and for teachers to be able to use all this productively. I shall reserve the rest of answers to Matt.
Well, I was just going to speak from experience, because I think, I think technology can be intimidating, but often it's the pedagogy that goes with the technology that can also be intimidating. I think sometimes that's just people not wanting to do things differently because people feel very comfortable with the way they've always done things. But I think in the context of a sort of active learning facilitated environment, it can cause discomfort to the teacher to not speak and to be there and challenged by the students, particularly when the students have access to internet resources and can ask all sorts of very complicated questions. So I think it is often a combination of the technology and the pedagogy, and I think it is an important component is just a reluctance to change what one's done for many years. In terms of how we overcome them, I think, of course, faculty development is key. So I think investing in faculty development programs, having champions, I think is another really important, champions who really speak the same language as those that you're trying to convince. And I think that one has to play the long game. I mean, one has to really invest and recognise that it takes time.
So really well answered already. Just because I noticed you're a PhD student, was it? Yeah, and in educational technology. So Peggy Ertmer's work on first and second order barriers that prevent teachers using technology. So there are all these first order barriers that involve, the technology fails or I don't have enough equipment, and they're all the sort of the more logistical things. But underpinning that and potentially more influential is the very point that you raise on teacher beliefs. So we really, if we're going to make a difference in the integration of technology in education, we really have to target teacher beliefs. And a lot of that beliefs is about self-efficacy. And a lot of that self-efficacy is actually about self-image and how they're going to look in front of their classes if they don't know as much as a lot of their students, which is these days inevitably the case. So I believe part of getting over that fear is helping them to create a collaborative learning environment with their students where they don't have to be the expert necessarily, that, hey, let's learn this together. And it's great to go in with some knowledge and skills and understanding of the technologies, but not to be scared or feel like you've lost face if you don't have the most successful lesson, and that to be able, you can call on the assistance of the teachers. And I think the point that Naomi raised about providing adequate assistance for teachers and professional learning is huge, because as an EdTech researcher, the idea that we used to have pedagogical and content knowledge that we'd sort of put together, but now we've got this whole other TPAC domain of technology and how that integrates with pedagogy and how that integrates with content. And that shouldn't be underestimated, that there's an incredible amount of work that goes into really understanding how all that fits together. So providing that professional learning and time is essential.
Thank you for the answers and the question. So I'm going to take another question for the speakers.
I'm Kirti Menon. I'm from University of Johannesburg, South Africa. I wanted to ask whether there has been any resistance, because this does speak to a changing role of the academic and absorption of new roles. And you've partially answered this, but how does one deal with the perception that the role of the academic is changing so substantially, and you could have deep resistance to this, as we've all seen with adoption of blended learning, etc. People resisted, hated Blackboard, hated, how do we deal with that? That's one. And my second question is that this seems to speak very well to multidisciplinary work, especially in the field of medicine and engineering. How does it work for, I can see that it can be used for humanities or the arts, but is there a kind of resistance from the arts segment? Because even the displays that I've seen and the speakers have all spoken to the sciences.
Thank you for that question. I would love to answer the question for teacher education, but since I'm a moderator, I'm going to pass the question to the other speakers on the panel. Yeah.
I just want to try the first questions. Actually, it's relevant to the previous questions. And I think what we are currently doing is it's not to replace the traditional way. I would say, let's say, if the teacher is very comfortable to teach a concept like in mathematics, and the students are well received such kinds of traditional approach, then there is no need to think about VR and ARs. And on the other side, when we teach students, somehow the student always lost it. Not only this year, many, many years, always people agree, say there are something very tough for students to figuring out. There are chances you can try VR and AR. Therefore, in the high flip classroom, actually we have a 3-in-1. The traditional whiteboard is there. The internet online search kinds of engines are there, and the VR, AR is also there. Depends on the needs. So for our content created, typically it's 5 minutes kinds of durations. It's not to have the whole teaching session is purely VR, AR. I don't think this will work. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think if the premise of the question is active collaborative learning with technology, then necessarily that requires a change in culture and mindset for most students and most educators. I think for us at the medical school, because we were starting from scratch, it was probably a little bit easier to achieve that because it was a given that if you join that medical school, that's the way things would work. I think for these roles to be accepted from the educator, from the academic's perspective, it does need the university to recognise the value of this approach to teaching and learning, and that has to be reflected in promotion and tenure processes in the way that education is appraised at the university level. And I think that is a change that is starting to happen at NTU, and I think that's a very welcome change, and I think that drives a lot of the behaviours and the value that's placed on that changed role. And I think it does link a little bit with the previous question about how it feels for the educators in the classroom. And for the students, I suppose the other point to make, in many ways, we've found, I think, that because we use this pedagogy consistently, and there isn't really an alternative in terms of traditional lecture format, that probably has helped us to achieve acceptance both by students and by the academics. But I think it really does need the universities to actually value and appreciate that change in role.
I'm going to answer from the system's perspective. I think I'm drawing from experience of how Singapore government implement ICT master plans in K-12 schools from 1997 until now. So they have undergone 4 phases of ICT master plan for all the schools in Singapore. I think one of the lessons that we can see from that attempt is that they go from a very system perspective. There's a policy, there's a very clear goal statement for everybody. There's professional development support for teachers, there's resource support for teachers and students, and infrastructure support. So you look at the whole ecology of how to support this whole systems, like what Naomi mentioned, the staff appraisal systems, the reward structure. So you got to approach this change as something very systemic, not something that you can do piecemeal, and also allow some degree of ground up innovation. I think those really help.
Thank you. Just as a footnote, if I may, since you asked about the question of humanities, in the National Institute of Education, we handle both the sciences as well as the humanities subjects, and we also prepare teachers to teach these subjects. And just to give you an example, in our Visual Performing Arts academic group, we have courses on ceramics and pottery. And VR and AR are really very, very useful because it really enables the students to see how something is modeled, and then they try that, and reflecting on that, they will think of how to teach the students. And very often, because our student teachers have experienced these technologies themselves, these technological improvisations and changes, when they go into the school, they are full of ideas, and they would try to persuade their principals to adopt certain kinds of new technologies that the school may not be adopting. But Sing Chi is saying it's a system whole innovation. But as in NIE, we do take it very seriously, and we actually have a grant for all our teacher educators to apply, just to encourage them to have innovations in their teaching by using technology. Yeah. So it is possible. Yeah, I would share more examples, but this is just a footnote. I think take one last question. I think that there were some indications of another question just now. Yes, please. Oh, sorry. I think I'll let this gentleman ask the question since his hand went up first. Yeah, thank you. So this will be the last question. Yeah, thank you.
It's not quite a question, but a comment to Prof. Naomi, maybe. You know, the traditional medical curriculum is so heavy and so tight. You know, everybody wants to have a slot in the curriculum. You know, you have the geneticists and everyone. You know, so it makes the curriculum so heavy, and at the expense of other important things like humanities and ethics and experiential learning of the students in the community, you know, and assessing that. So I think the advantage of AR and VR would be to perhaps enhance the understanding of the students, and also shortening the curriculum a bit so that we can have more time for all these other equally important subjects of humanities and learning in the community to be in place. So what do you think of that?
Yes, I think that's such a good point, because there's always a temptation to just add more and more new things into a curriculum. And we've recently been reviewing our curriculum, and the rule has been if you want to add something in, you have to take something out. And we've been very keen to have both more humanities, but actually more engineering as well in the curriculum. But that has meant that we've had to make some decisions. And I suppose, the other point that's been made previously is that the way that medical knowledge is expanding so rapidly, so there are a lot of details that really aren't important to learn anymore because they're accessible just at the touch of a screen. So I think if we can also, even on the science side, focus on those core concepts and then potentially use AR and VR to enhance that understanding, then that maybe would free up more space for these other areas that you talked about. So,
Thank you.
Point.
Thank you. So will you please join me in thanking the four speakers for this afternoon?